Hey, what is up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. Hope you guys are doing all right. And welcome to episode 6 of the Kotlin Messenger series. In this lesson, we are finally going to be able to send messages back and forth between multiple users inside of our application. So on the agenda here, that is the first topic we will take care of. And the way we are going to do that is to save messages inside of Firebase Database, which will allow us to later on listen for messages inside of Firebase itself. All right, so let me show you what this feature looks like in the completed version of the application right over here. So if I want to message Arya Stark, I can just click into her row and then I'll type in a new message for her, hit the send button, and you'll see that message show up right over there. So that is what we are going to do in today's lesson. Let's go ahead and get back into Android Studio and pick up where we left off in the last lesson. Let's go. Alrighty guys, welcome back to Android Studio yet again here. And the way we are going to start off today's lesson is to simply rerun our application with the code that we have right over here. And I'm going to click on new message inside of the nav bar, click on one of these users, and we pretty much ended last episode by creating all of this dummy data inside of our chat log. And that is these couple of lines inside of the onCreate method. And all the way down over here, we have chat from item and chat to item. And these are pretty much the rows inside of our chat log. So this is the from and this is the to row. And so we know that because the layout over here is getting the from and to rows respectively, like so. All right, so that is pretty good. And the first thing I would like to do is to revisit the onCreate method. One thing that I do not like right now is that all of this code over here is kind of cluttering up the onCreate. So I would like to recreate it inside of a function instead. So set up dummy data. And so somewhere down here, we will create this function of set up dummy data, and we'll just paste that in there. And so that's all our data. We can rerun our application. We should hopefully see the same thing, but we'll see what happens here. So click on new message and Jaime Lannister. Okay, so that looks great to me. And let's see, what is the next thing we would like to move on to? Well, why don't I show you how to change the actual text inside of these bubbles over here. And we're gonna have to make use of these bind functions inside of the from and to items. So this is pretty easy if you just access the view holder. So view holder will contain this thing called item view. And you can access the actual IDs with text view of from and to row. So inside of my XML files over there, I have my actual IDs set up. So this is the from item, so I'll use the from row. And let's just call this text equals from message, ... And we could actually do the same thing for the to items. So this is relatively similar. And we'll say item view, text view to row text. And let's see, this is the to row text message that is longer. And hopefully that'll wrap for me, so I'll instantly run this. Hopefully I can see my code, and there we go. We have the from message and then the to message looking like so, right? And that's pretty easy. This is kind of why I like to use the groupy third-party dependency. It makes my life a lot easier in terms of getting multiple types of rows inside of my recycler view components. Okay, so one last thing I would like to show you how to do is I actually want to introduce a constructor for these items as well. So what I mean is I want to say val text and let this be a string. And the reason why I want to do this is because I actually want to make this a little bit more dynamic. So I'll replace that with a text and I'll use val text. And so text is a type string like that. Okay, so with those two changes, you can now introduce text inside of these items. So for example, this is the from message, type out something interesting. And this guy, you can say to message, and let's say to message. Hopefully that works. I'm going to rerun my app, use the instant change, and hopefully we'll see something different. So hit the to message, hit the Jaime Lannister, and here we go. We have our messages inside of these bubbles, but again, they are a lot more dynamic. So I'll run this again, and you'll see the changes right there. And so I wanted to do this because this is going to make it a little bit easier to explain things later on. So that looks pretty good to me. So now it's time to actually move on to the more important task in today's lesson. And that task is to actually start sending some messages using this send button right over there. And I'll show you how to do that by going into on create, and somewhere down here, let's say on line 27, we will say send button and chat log, and that's the ID that we have for that button right over there. We're going to say set on click listener, and instead of here, we'll just simply log a message for now. For the tag, I actually want to create a static constant, and the way we do that is to use a companion object. This guy will be val, and let's say tag equal to chat log. That makes sense to me, and we'll use the tag over here. So tag, that's the constant, and for the message, we'll say attempt to send message, and we'll try to run this now and see what happens whenever we tap on that send button. We'll bring out the chat log over here, and let's see, new message. Let's click on just any random person here and hit the send, and there we go. We have our log showing that message correctly. So that's what it looks like. And inside of here, why don't we actually perform the send message with a new function? So that's a good name for us to create down below, private function, perform message, or send message rather. And so in here is the meat and potatoes of today's lesson. So how do we actually send a message to Firebase, right? And so the Firebase database that we're going to construct will look like this. So currently, all you guys have seen is pretty much the user's node like that. And the way we are going to save all of our messages is very similar. We have a messages node, and inside of here, we have all of our messages, right? So the structure that I'm going to actually save looks like this. We have a from ID, a to ID, and this ID is the actual message ID up over here. The text for the message that we want to send, and then something called a timestamp. And I'll explain to you what this means, but the first thing I would like to do is to show you how to save data inside of a node such that we can create these list objects automatically for us, right? So I'm going to move this out of the way, and I'll show you exactly what I mean. And this will make more sense once I start saving some data here. So let's head on back over to the perform send message function. And the first thing I'll do is very, very similar to what we've been doing all along. We'll grab a reference to Firebase Database like that, get instance, and this guy will say get reference. Now, because we're saving everything under the messages node, we'll just do that. And then the trick here is actually make a call to push, and this is going to generate an automatic node for us to start saving some data in. So that's pretty much going to be one of these nodes over here, so LHJ and all the way down, so on and so forth. And so I'll show you what this looks like once we save some data. And so this reference over here, we can now access it. So we can say a reference, and we can set some kind of value in here. Now you can set whatever you want, right? So text and integers and all that good stuff. But what we are going to use instead is some kind of class object. So I'll create a class object called chat message, and I'll set it equal to something. So maybe I can create this class over here. So class of chat message. And let's say the value is going to contain a couple of different things. So the first one is going to be the actual text message of the message object itself. And I'll just leave it as that for now. And then I'll save this guy inside of my Firebase reference. So what this looks like is I'm going to create this, and the only thing that we want to send in here is the actual text string. And I'll show you what this is by grabbing it outside of this message thing down below. So hopefully I can get access to it. I already have an ID called edit text chat log, and we'll just click on that. And over here we can say text like so, and then toString to actually get the text out of here. So if you tap on here, the toString will actually give you that message. All right, so that's pretty good, and we'll say text equals all of that. And what we can do now is we can grab this text and just put it in there. Okay, so that kind of completes the actual chat message object. And what I can do now is I can actually save it inside of the reference like so. Now that's pretty much all we need, but I would actually like to listen whenever the message is saved successfully. So I will log a message over here, log d and tag, and let's say saved our chat message. and just leave it on as that, or maybe I can add the ID as well. So to actually get the ID, you can say reference.key like that, and that'll get you your new ID that is generated from this push method call over here. So I'll run my code again, and what's going to happen is we are going to create a brand new reference using the push method, which helps us generate a item for our message list, and then we'll save it inside of Firebase. So I'll show you what that generates inside of our node tree over here. So this is our message node. You'll see a new message pop up over there once I send a message. So we will grab this guy, and this is a test, and we'll hit the send, and you'll see this green object on the bottom. If you open it up, you'll see text over here, and that's the message that we have inside of our edit text component in the white. All right, so the question that you're probably having is, why do we want to save everything inside of this structure? Well, it's going to make it very, very easy for us to retrieve these messages later on, now that it's in some kind of list structure. All right, so that's all the explanation I want to give for now. And the thing I would like to move on to is to actually save these additional properties on my message. And this is going to allow me to, determine if this is the from message or the to message, as well as maybe the timestamp for the actual message itself. So let me show you what that looks like by going back into the code right over here. So let me go ahead and begin modifying the chat message right now. And so the other properties that I want my chat message to have is this over here. So I'll start with the ID. This is also a string. And then I also need the from ID. So from ID, this is a string. And then we have the to ID as well. And that is also a string. And maybe I'll just include the timestamp right now. This guy will be a long, and I'll show you why in just a little bit here. All right, so all these properties will be really useful for me to kind of help determine what these messages represent a little bit later on. So what I would like to do is I'm going to modify the chat message constructor on line 48. So the first thing we need to do is actually pass in the ID. So if you create this again to construct it, you'll see what you need in here. So the ID is the actual reference dot key. So that's my ID. And the next thing is the text right here. So text is up above. And then we have the from ID and the to ID. All right, so here is the other bit of code and logic that we need to clarify. So let's say val from ID. And this is going to equal Firebase auth like so, get the instance, and get the UID like that. And the reason why the from ID is this over here is because this is the signed in user's UID, and because I'm the person sending this message, it is the actual signed in user. So that's kind of why we have that. And then we have something called the to ID. And so the question is, what exactly is the to ID? Well, it belongs to this Jamie Lannister person all the way at the top there. And we don't really have any way to access it, except for the fact that we kind of learned how to do it in the last lesson by using this over here. So let me remove that commented line of code, and I'll get the user by accessing the intent and using the parcel trick. All right, so let's go down here, and I'll paste that line of code, and then this over here is our user.uid. Okay, so that looks pretty good. And now what we can do is we can say the from ID is over here, to ID, so to ID, and we can actually say timestamp as well. So let's see, we have a couple of errors. This is a string mismatch because that's an optional. This seems to be an optional as well. I believe the fix for this is to just use that. So that's pretty good. We can actually do the same thing over here as well, but maybe you actually want to be a little bit safer about it. And you can actually check the from ID. So you can say if from ID is null, then we'll just return. So you can do that as well. That means you don't need these two bangs. And then at the very end here for the actual timestamp, you can actually access the timestamp by saying system.current time in milliseconds. Now this is actually milliseconds, and if you want to turn it into seconds, you can divide it by 1000 like that. If you're developing an iOS typically gives you value of time in seconds like this instead. So make sure you know the difference. All right, so I'll leave it as that. And what we can do now is I can save or actually run my code now and save my message. And you'll see that inside of Firebase Database, you'll get much more data than just the text property over there. And so clicking on new message, we will click on maybe, let's see, Jamie Lannister again. And we will say, here is a new message, and we'll just hit the send button over there. And for the actual node, we have a lot more in terms of the properties for our message. If you look at the from ID and the to ID, you can actually open up the users. So the to ID is this P1VD value, and P1VD belongs to Jamie Lannister. From ID XXJ is this over here, which is Jon Snow, and that's the current account that I'm logged in as. And that's pretty much how it works. We save our messages inside of this type of structure. And now what I want to do is I actually want to fetch all of these messages and somehow present it inside of my recycler view guy, right? So I will show you how that works, but I would actually like to delete this guy right here because this doesn't have all of the properties that I need. So I'll just remove that, hit the X over there, and that guy will just go away. All right, so let's move on to actually listening for the messages inside of our recycler view guy. And the way I will do that is to go into on create over here. And what I can do is I can write another function. So instead of the dummy data, I actually don't want that. So I'll show you what it looks like if I just comment that code out. And so now all we get is a blank empty chat log in the green. So over here, I'll say listen for messages. And this is a new private function we'll create. So this is a very common pattern. Anytime you want to create more functionality, obviously you want to kind of enclose it in its own function like that. And for the listen for message method, we are going to grab a reference to Firebase again. So a ref, and we'll say Firebase Database and get instance like so. And then we can say get reference like that. All right, so this is going to be a little bit different, but we are going to listen on messages again. And the thing we want to do is we want to add a listener on this reference now. And so you can do this a couple of different ways. And basically you can say add listener, and you can add a listener for a single event. You can add a listener for child events, or you can do this value event listener guy. And so what we will do is we are going to use the child event listener, and this guy will notify us of every piece of data that is going to belong to this messages node. All right, so that's going to allow us to listen for new messages as they're coming in and being created under this tree over here. So that way it's more real time. The list is going to be able to sort of automatically refresh itself using this listener instead. All right, so let's move on to something else over here. And the question is, what exactly is this child event listener object? Well, all you have to do is say object and child event listener. And inside of here, you just say brace like that. Now, this guy is going to be a lot of unnecessary code and you can't really avoid it, but you need to implement all of these methods. And let's just do this really quickly. So we'll say on child added. So that's the important one that I need. The rest of them will be right here. So on cancel, I will just remove these to-do statements. And then we need the other one. So just type on and remove that. On child move, and on child remove like that. All right, so these four functions I'm not really going to touch, at least not for now. The only thing I'm interested in is actually this on child added method. And so inside of here, what I can do is I can say p0 like this, and I can actually get the value using some kind of class. And the class is going to be the chat message class. And the reason why I'm using this is because I saved everything as this chat message. And so using this call, I can actually get my chat message out very easily using just this one line over here. All right, so what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to log this out so that you can see what it's doing. So I'm going to use tag, and we can say chat message dot, let's see, text. I think that is pretty good. We probably need a question mark over there. And so now that we are going to listen for the messages, I'm going to rerun my application, and you'll see the new things being printed out down below. Let's say new message over here. And let's just click on Jamie Lannister. And so you'll see that it crashes, right? And the reason why it crashes is because we don't have this thing called an empty argument constructor. So no argument constructor, that's what it says. I will fix that right now by going back to the chat message over here. And what you can do is something very similar to what we did in a previous lesson. You just want to say constructor, and this guy provided with the empty constructor using all of these properties over here. So these are all going to be empty. And for the timestamp, we need a long, and I'll just use -1 like that. All right, so that's how we perform all this code change, and we can run our code again. This guy really belongs inside of its own file. So let me just cut this and make the change really quickly by entering a new chat message model class. So hit that, paste that in there, and that looks a lot better. I probably want to run my code again, or maybe I need to fix some of the changes over here now that I moved it out. So just import this guy like that, and I might need to import it somewhere else. So I'll just move that out of the way, and maybe I can run my code again. So let's see, it's building and everything looks good to me. I will now click on new message, and that error that we had before will hopefully go away. We are going to look at the logcat, and you'll see that we have these messages over here now. So I'm going to type in a new message, and you'll see it being logged out down below. So let's see, I'm going to click on that, a brand new message, and hit on the send button. You'll see it down here. So a brand new message is that over there. Okay, so this is actually being logged from inside of this listener, this child event listener guy. And what I would like to do is whenever I'm notified of new messages inside of this node over here, I would like to add it onto my recycler view somehow. And the way I'm going to do that is I actually need to set up my adapter as a property on this class so that I can access it. So I'm going to say adapter equals group adapter like that. And I'll say view holder and just create a brand new adapter. And for this guy, let's just set it on our recycler view. So recycler view, chat log, and we'll set the adapter equal the instance property of adapter like that. Okay, so what this does is it allows me to add on objects inside of this adapter, which is currently empty. And every time I add things onto this adapter, it'll automatically refresh my list. And so currently right now, it's not going to do anything because nothing is inside of the adapter. So obviously it's going to be empty. So click on one of these guys. So you don't see anything there. However, what I can do is inside of this guy, I can start adding objects inside of my adapter. And so what I mean is I can say something like adapter and add a group item. So this guy, we can say, I think from item, so chat from item. And this guy, we will construct it with some kind of text, right? So you can say chat message dot text like that. And you always have to do this little bit of optional chaining, but I don't really like doing this. And instead, I would rather do this right over here. So if chat message is not equal to null, then we will do all this over here. So I'm just going to cut that, remove this, and remove that as well. So dot text. And now I can run my code again. So we'll see what this does. And it's basically going to present all of my messages inside of the recycler view. And you'll see it in just a moment here. So I'll click on that. And let's click on Jamie Lannister. And here all of my messages are showing up inside of my recycler view. So we have all of these as from messages for now, but I'll show you how to change that later. But what's going on is every time we have notification of a new message via this call, we're just pumping that data inside of our adapter. And every time we add things onto the adapter, it automatically refreshes the recycler view very efficiently. And that's just how groupy the dependency actually works. All right. So that's how we get our messages to show up. But one thing that is a problem is these messages don't really have a way to kind of differentiate themselves, right? So this guy is always on the left side, but sometimes we want these messages to show up on the right as well. And the way to do that is to actually check the ID on this chat message object. And so what I mean is we actually want to say adapter.add, and we actually want to use the toItem as well. So you can say chat message.text like that. And so the problem is we don't exactly know when to use this one or when to use this one, right? And so all we got to do is we can make a check on chat message. So chat message has a property on it called from ID and also toID. And so I'm going to use the from ID over here, and I will check if it's equal to the Firebase auth.getInstance.uid. So again, this is the ID of the user that is currently logged in. And so if that is the case, then we will just use the from item like that. And so otherwise, we will use the toItem right over there. So paste that there. And now I can run my code again, and we'll see if this actually makes the recycler view change. And so that's kind of what it does. And so the reason why this message is showing on the right is because I was playing around with it while I was preparing today's lesson. And what I would like to do is to kind of demonstrate this one more time by modifying this message all the way on the bottom. And so the way to do that is to actually go inside of Firebase Database, and you can start playing around with your data. So this is the message, brand new message over here. And let's say I flip the from ID and the toID, right? So what I mean is I can copy that, and let's say I want to change this guy over here. So I'll paste that in there. And then I will take the toID and I'll paste that in here as well. So hit that. And I think I need to actually hit the enter button. So I will paste that in here. So let me click that and paste that and hit enter. And so now I've just pretty much reversed the ID, and that's going to flip this message to the right side whenever I go back to the screen. So let me go back to Jamie Lannister, and now you see the message on the right side. This is going to confirm that the logic that we are checking over here is working to what we expect it to do. All right, guys, that's going to end the very first lesson on how we can actually send messages and also listen for messages from Firebase Database. And in the very next episode, we're going to have to differentiate between where we send messages to and from in this system of multiple users. And finally, I really hope you enjoyed today's lesson, and I hope you learned something new. That's going to be it for me today. I'll see you in the very next lesson. Bye bye, guys.